The first time that I visited my salt marsh research site, I was already 9 months into my PhD program. After a 5 hour ride in a cramped field truck from DC to New Jersey, I step out into the summer sunlight. Grass sprouts out of the black muck underneath a huge blue sky. The land is flat, very flat, so that my field of vision is filled with blue and green and blue. Blue sky, green grass, blue water. The water is salty. The air is a little salty, and every creature that lives here is a bit salty. This is a salt marsh, a coastal land feature made of sediment held in place by grass roots, submerged twice daily by the salty ocean water. Even at low tide, the marsh is a bit soggy, muck squishing underneath my boots. But at the highest tides, the salty water covers all of the grass. 15 years ago, I was a preteen, stuck in a cul-de-sac in suburban central Texas, hundreds of miles away from the coast, and I had never heard of salt marshes or even seen one. But now I've learned that salt marshes have a global distribution, and they're all along the United States coast, including the Texas coast. I've learned more than 75% of fish, shrimp, and crab species need salt marshes during their life cycle. And just by existing, salt marshes save coastal cities from hurricane floods by absorbing waters that would otherwise go into homes. And just by existing, salt marshes store carbon in their roots, keeping it out of the atmosphere. The salt marsh seems so simple when I look at it from a distance. It's just grass, water, and sky. But I'm a salt marsh ecologist, so I spend much of my time in the salt marsh looking down and up close. Between the sediment and the grass stalks, I easily find dozens of fiddler crabs darting out of burrows, hundreds of coffee bean snails lurking in the mud, and millions of plant hoppers bouncing stem to stem. Thousands of species, from microbes to insects to fish to birds, have been identified at the particular New Jersey salt marsh that I am working at for my PhD. I'm relatively new to the science of salt marshes, but my PhD advisor, Gina, has been studying this specific New Jersey salt marsh for 15 years. When we trek through the salt marsh together, she remarks to me about how she's noticed changes. She points out to me a brown bamboo pole sticking out of the muck. It's the kind of pole that we use to mark our experiments. She tells me that when she put this bamboo pole down several years ago, the bamboo pole marked the edge of a grass patch. But the grass patch that we see now is small, and its edge is yards away from the bamboo pole. She tells me that the bamboo pole now shows her how much the grass patch is shrinking as grass dies and leaves behind muck. Then Gina points to some ponds. She tells me how she saw them form over the past years, because when she started working out here, those ponds were grass that died and left muck, then muck that became ponds as the sea is taking over the marsh. My PhD advisor says that she can see the effects of sea level rise at our salt marsh research site. So she's been working there for 15 years. And I start to think about how in those 15 years, over 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide has been pumped into Earth's atmosphere because of grossly unregulated industry. I think about how in those 15 years, ice has melted and ocean water has warmed up and expanded such that the global sea level rose about 2 inches. And I think about how in those 15 years, the sea level rise in New Jersey has been faster than the global rise. It has been 3 inches. And in the next 15 years, it's predicted to rise 6 more inches. And this rise would put pretty much all of our salt marsh underwater, not just at the highest tides, but at all times. Our salt marsh isn't just changing due to climate change, it's being totally lost. Before I started studying the salt marsh for my PhD, I didn't take climate change very seriously. I thought bulldozing nature, that's a big problem. I thought air and water pollution and environmental racism that goes with it, that's the urgent problem. I thought freaking single-use plastic everywhere, that's the urgent problem. I used to think climate change wasn't urgent. I thought it wasn't affecting people yet. But now, as I'm studying a sinking salt marsh next to a coastal city that needs the salt marsh to be intact and healthy for the city's protection from hurricanes, I see with my own eyes that climate change is urgent. It's a problem happening now. It's a problem connected to all our other problems and making it all worse. So I'm a salt marsh ecologist, and now I'm salty at these fossil fuel executives, these politicians, these so-called leaders who have had the evidence about carbon emissions and climate change for decades longer than I've even been alive. I'm salty that so many scientists before me have done a lot of work, published a lot of reports, and advised a lot of leaders, and yet global carbon emissions are still increasing each year with no real plan to stop. As I research the sinking salt marsh, I struggle with what I believe the role of science is at this moment. I'm launching my scientific career studying an ecosystem that will be totally lost to sea level rise within the next 15 years. More science isn't going to save my salt marsh study site, and more science isn't going to save the people who live on the coasts who can't afford to leave their homes during the next hurricane. I know that more science won't solve the problems of climate change, and I feel such restlessness because, well, I feel like I do know what will solve them. In the next 15 years, I want to see policy solutions that totally phase out fossil fuels and carbon emissions and environmental destruction. I want to see new leadership in politics and business, in every aspect of society, new leadership that actually listens to science and cares about people's well-being and enacts bold changes in energy production and ecosystem protection. And I know this will only happen if millions of people hold leaders accountable and push for it, speak up for it, vote for it, protest for it. It won't happen just because of more science. So I know it's a long shot, but I do want to see my salt marsh saved. If sea level rise can be limited to only a few more inches because carbon emissions were stopped, then maybe in 15 years, I'll be able to come back to this salt marsh and admire the blue sky, green grass, blue water that makes my skin and my hair a little bit salty. Maybe in this better future, the future that millions of us voted for and protested for, I'll be able to use my science to help restore salt marshes, where the green grass is taking carbon out of the air and storing it safely in its roots. Thank you.